Welcome to Navigating Working Relationships with Site Supervisors, a webinar for AmeriCorps Vista leaders. Multi-site Vista projects can be complex environments in which to serve. This webinar guides Vista leaders in developing a customized approach to working with site supervisors. I'm your host, Andy King, Senior Training Specialist with AmeriCorps Vista. It's my honor to introduce our presenter, Kapila Vevegama, who is a trainer for the Vista Leader Program, as well as a leadership coach and management consultant in the San Francisco Bay Area. Kapila has a long connection with the Vista program and with Vista leaders in particular, having developed and delivered in-person training and webinars for Vista leaders for many years. Additionally, Kapila has also facilitated trainings for Vista supervisors and Vista members for more than 17 years. So Kapila, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Andy. Hello and happy Thursday, Vista leaders. So thank you for joining us today and giving us this opportunity to discuss with you on how we as Vista leaders can effectively work with our site supervisors and site partners. So let's first look at our targeted outcome for this webinar today. There are three outcomes that we would like to accomplish during this webinar. Let's take a look at them. First, we will look at challenges and complexities Vista leaders, that is you all, face working with site supervisors, so our conversation is grounded on day-to-day reality. Next, we will review a four-step process that will help us to work effectively with site supervisors and site partners. Finally, we will examine three key ingredients for creating a customized approach to working with each of our site supervisors. Let's begin our discussion by identifying some of your real-life challenges and complexities working with site supervisors as Vista leaders. So, let's hear about some of your experiences. Please share with us the kind of challenges and complexities you have experienced or currently experiencing working with site supervisors.
All right, and as I mentioned earlier, for this activity, we will use the chat panel. So if you don't see the chat, move your cursor towards the bottom of the screen and you'll see the menu bar. Click on that chat icon and that will open the chat panel. And if you're out of full screen, it'll be over to the side so you can still see the slides. When you compose your message, be sure to use the drop down there and select all panelists and attendees so that everyone will be able to see your response. All right, so we've got a few of your responses coming in. A couple of them are about lack of responsiveness from site supervisors. Let's see, Rhiannon says there's a reluctance to follow the VAD or to stick with what's in the plan. And then some lack of understanding. Here's one around direct service and capacity building and not understanding the difference there. Or differences in understanding around technology or protocols, you know, how the project is designed and how things are supposed to work within the framework, within the organization or the Vista project. Yeah, a couple of themes coming up again and again. Yeah, not understanding the role of Vista members, treating them like employees, or allowing other staff at the organization to try to engage Vista members inappropriately. All right, so those are some of the big ones that I noticed. Kapila, anything standing out for you?
Thank you, Andy, for summarizing this for us, and thank you, leaders, for your reflective sharing. Actually, and it is interesting how most of what you just summarized for us based on our leaders' responses seems to fall under some major categories. As you see here, There are common challenges Vista leaders encounter. Most of what was just shared falls under these common themes. So let's take a quick look. Expectations clash. In any relationship, whether personal or professional, each party has expectations of the other. The issue is that most of the time, we don't clearly share our expectations, which can lead us to act based on our own expectations without understanding the expectations the other person has. And this misalignment could easily lead to disappointment, frustration, and even anger. So we, as Vista leaders and our supervisors, are not immune to this if we don't intentionally address it. Lack of understanding regarding the mission or the nature of Vista program. Based on my experience training Vista supervisors, I can attest to this challenge. We know that the Vista mission is not something that can be easily explained. Then you throw in all the rules and it gets more complicated. This is a fact for some of our site supervisors, and working with such individuals can almost feel like you are working in opposite directions. Misinterpretation or the varied interpretations of the Vista leader role by site supervisors. This is also something that we saw that came through the chat. So how many of you have felt that some of your site supervisors don't understand your role? Please raise your hand using the raise hand button if you have felt this.
Yeah, I see lots of hands going up, Kapila.
All right. So, is this surprising? Not at all, because given the unique nature of the role we play as Vista leaders, right? So let's be honest. We may have struggled at the beginning of service to get a handle of our own role. So we must see this an opportunity to educate them. Workplace culture clash. Just because all the sites are part of the same Vista project, that doesn't mean they all share the same workplace culture, right? For example, you might have members serving at different schools. While their sites may share some common aspects of school culture, you will find each school also has its own culture. Likewise, your intermediary organization could have a workplace culture that is somewhat or very different from that of the sites. Since site supervisors reflect their own site's workplace culture, this could lead to challenges in working with them. Work style differences could be a major challenge if we don't pay attention to it. Given that each site supervisor is going to have their own work style, which could differ from our own, it's possible to experience frustration because of such differences if we lack self-awareness about our own work styles. We can adapt to others' work styles only if we know our own. Varied personality styles. This is, of course, the dimension that brings both excitement and frustration to human relationships. People do not leave their personality behind when entering the workplace. Personality is ingrained and it follows like a shadow. Since we so much operate from and identify with our personality style, any style that differs might challenge our way of being and can even feel like a threat. Work relationships that are not managed for personality differences could lead to co-workers being offended or humiliated by each other's way of doing business. So, looking at these challenges shows us the opportunity and responsibility we have as Vista leaders to relate in ways that contribute to productive working relationship with our site supervisors. Now, we would like to introduce a 4-step process you can adapt to establish effective working relationships with your site supervisors and site partners. And please remember, when we say site partners, This could be anyone else you work closely with at sites, including your VISTA members. The 4 steps are: step 1, identify the sponsor's expectations of you. Step 2, verify the sponsor's expectations of you. Step 3, solicit site's expectations of you. And step 4 is to develop and communicate working agreements. As we look at these 4 steps, I'm sure there are some steps some of you have already implemented. The idea here is to give you a comprehensive approach. So if there are certain steps you have not taken yet, you find that could be beneficial, you can adapt those to your current approach. Also, based on the nature of your project and sponsor organization, you will have to adjust your strategies for each of these steps. The first step is to identify and then create a visual that shows the expected working connections, relationships, and communication channels you must follow as an intermediary VISTA leader based on your current understanding. You can use the project plan, MOU, VLAD, and any other project-related documents as the basis for this activity. Creating a such visual brings more clarity to your current understanding of expected protocol and work expectations, as well as help you to identify areas you are still not clear about. So let's look at an example of a visual diagram or a map. In your visual diagram or map, first, identify the working and communication aspects that you are directly responsible to your own supervisor. These could be things such as submitting certain reports, communicating member progress, etc., based on your supervisor's expectations and project requirements. Next, you will do the same for each of your site supervisors, members, and any other project-related staff. These are work and communications that you are responsible to carry out directly with the site partners that do not require communicating through your supervisor. Thirdly, as you can see with the dashed purple lines, you identify the work and communication aspects you are always required to carry out through your supervisor. Of course, you could have a different communication pattern for each site based on the needs of each site, your supervisor, the site supervisor, and you. When you create your own diagram, do it in a way that brings the necessary clarity. However, it is very important that you have all your sites represented on your diagram, as certain aspects could be different based on the nature of a particular site. So, once you have created your visual map, then it is very important to review it with your supervisor. This second step will help both of you to be on the same page by looking for what's missing, as well as correcting any misunderstanding you might have regarding how you work and communicate with your supervisor, site supervisors, and site partners. Invite your supervisor to clarify their expectations of your work and communication with the supervisor, site supervisors, and other site partners. When you and your supervisor, both of you are going through this step, please make sure to speak up if you have any concern or are unclear about any of the expectations. You know why? If you don't discuss it during this process, you might be committing to an expectation that might be unreasonable, impractical, or even outside of your role as a VISTA leader. For example, a supervisor might have an expectation that the leader will submit e-grant reports. As you know, this is certainly outside of a leader's role, and from a project administration point of view, it is illegal. This is why carrying out this second step thoroughly can serve you and your supervisors in many ways in the long run. Please ensure that you and your supervisor dedicate sufficient time to thoroughly review the diagram and come to a mutual agreement on work and communication expectations. As the saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So also having such visual will bring transparency to how you work with your site supervisors and site partners and will prevent any unnecessary conflicts. So let's do a quick chat check-in again. What are some questions you can use when verifying sponsor expectations?
All right, so again, we're using the chat for this activity. The question is, what are some questions you can use when verifying your sponsor's expectations? And again, be sure you select all panelists and attendees so that everyone will see your response. All right, so one question is to ask if the supervisor has read through the VAD. Seems like a great place to start. Asking what would be best or how they would best like us to communicate, you know, what channels, what media to use. Another one, are you aware of the difference between direct service and capacity building? Asking if they need to make adjustments to the VAD due to COVID-19. Asking about how often they want to have direct communication, like a one-on-one call. Asking if they've reviewed all the information about the program that covers what they should know, and did they pass the quiz? Do they have any questions about it? Asking whether they've ever supervised vistas in the past. Making sure they're aware that this is not a 9-to-5 job. Asking whether they understand the definition of capacity building and how it gets applied on site. All right, great questions here.
Thank you, Andy. And thank you to those for giving us some good tips to verifying sponsor expectations. And one of the things I also noticed from your chat responses and with Andy's summarizing is that almost all of you had a sort of inviting nature when you are asking for such a verification. And that we really want to highlight, because as we all know, how we present, right, how we frame things can bring out different results. So even when you see there is certain challenge or certain confusion there, but reaching out to the supervisor in an inviting, open sort of, with an open attitude, the outcome will be a win-win situation for both parties. So we want to commend that, seeing that sort of the framing in your responses. Thank you. So let's look at the next step. The third step is to reach out to site supervisors and site partners to solicit their work and communication expectations of you as a VISTA leader. Based on your situation, you might be able to reach out to them on your own or through your supervisor. Now, reaching out through your supervisor might have the advantage of having more formality and project management blessings in the process. Once again, you must definitely choose a strategy based on your organizational context. It is important that when you reach out to solicit expectations, you and your supervisor share the sponsor's expectations of you and your role as a VISTA leader with the site supervisors and site partners, so they will come up with expectations that align with your role and sponsors' expectations of you. Let's again take a few minutes to hear some ideas you might have in regard to soliciting expectations, this time from your site supervisors and site partners. So the question is, what are some strategies and tools you have applied to solicit site supervisor's expectations of you as a VISTA leader.
All right, and I think by now everyone knows the drill. And just a general reminder to use the drop-down to send it to all panelists and attendees. And the question again is, what are some ways, maybe techniques, that you use to solicit site supervisors' expectations of you as a leader? Let's see, Kinta says, looking over the VISTA leader VAD together and reflecting on expectations there. Nice suggestion. Christopher says, holding one-on-one check-ins. Again, that's a great direct way of doing it. Asking some questions. Megan has some questions like, have you faced any challenges with the VISTA? How can I support you in these challenges? And how about successes and accomplishments? I would love to spotlight the awesome work. Let's see. Andrea says, most of the site supervisors are already well-versed, but I have my supervisor advocate on behalf of me to state that they should be including me in most of the conversations surrounding their vistas. All right, so getting your supervisor to emphasize that. Kat likes to ask, how would such and such a subject look for you in an ideal world? And then that way she can let them know what she's capable of letting them, what she's capable of, or what she won't be able to do. And let's see, asking about their vision for the organization.
Great. Thank you, Andy, and thank you for the generous and insightful sharing, leaders. And a couple of things again, as we are looking at your responses and listening to Andy summarizing. Each and every response had a great, very thoughtful, practical and insightful ideas. And again, we saw a couple of you again going to like framing in a questioning as a question in some ways to solicit, but framing again in a way to kind of have the site supervisors and site partners to respond in a cordial manner, and so they are invited to respond. And as you all know, one of the key traits of leaders is to be able to ask right questions. And there are books written, right, even with the same title. So that's something we want to highlight. And also a couple of you mentioned about, again, using the leaders VAD, the VLAD. Yes, of course, that is a key document that we can always keep going back to with all the different parties that we are working with. So thank you. Thank you for all these great insights. So now let's examine the last step, which allows you to compile all what you have gathered in those first 3 steps to a formal working relationships and communication expectations document. So during this 4th step, you will compile a list of working agreements based on the expectations you have gathered from your site supervisors and site partners. Once you have drafted the agreements, please review them with your supervisor to ensure those working and communication agreements are in alignment with VISTA and organizational policies, project agreement, project needs, etc. When you have your supervisor's approval on meeting site supervisors and site partners' work and communication expectations of you, you will not have to face a situation where your supervisor might question you for meeting such expectations of the site supervisors or the site partners. So once you have your supervisor's approval on the working and communication agreement, share them with the site supervisors and site partners. These agreements can now guide you, your supervisor, and your site supervisors on how you as a leader will relate to and communicate with them. If your supervisor communicates these agreements with the site supervisors and site partners, it will make it more formal and carry a certain level of authority and accountability as it is coming from the sponsor. I think one of our colleagues earlier actually said that, right? How you on the supervisor is communicating to the site supervisors and the site partners about such expectations. So that's a great strategy. However, as we mentioned earlier, you must again choose a strategy based on your organizational context. All right, so those are the 4 steps to establish and maintain effective working relationships and communication with your site supervisors and site partners. We know you may have already done some of these steps, but we wanted to look at those as a comprehensive approach, so you can either begin them or fine-tune some of these steps if you are already implementing them. Also, based on your organization and project context, you might not be able to do all 4 steps. Our invitation again is to see how you might adapt these steps to enhance your working relationships and communication with your site supervisors and site partners. So now let's move to the next phase of our webinar. Let's start our final section with a famous quote by Abraham Maslow. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. In my life, my own life experiences, working in the international development sector and domestic development context, I have witnessed this scenario many times. For example, someone will produce a community development model or a strategy that has worked in some context, and next thing you see is that some organizations will adopt it and just try to implement it as a cookie cutter approach to everything without regard to human uniqueness and complexities. So the outcome is failure and disappointment. This is also true when it comes to how we relate to and communicate with our different site supervisors and site partners. When we are working with our site supervisors and site partners, we must use a customized approach for each individual based on their different expectations, styles, and work context. Therefore, for example, our approach cannot be a one-size-fits-all spanner, but an adjustable range. Remember, at the beginning of our webinar, when we first identified the challenges that you could experience working with site supervisors, also what you have brought to the table during that conversation, there were 4 types of clashes showed up in that list. Expectation clashes, workplace culture clashes, work style clashes, and communication style clashes. So as you can see, these clashes occur because at times we lack sufficient awareness of the different needs and styles of individual site supervisors and site partners to customize our approach to suit each one. Since we have looked at how to avoid expectation clashes in the previous 4-step process, we will look at few key ingredients that will help you to create a customized approach to avoid the rest of the clashes. As we examine them, you will also have the chance to share your ideas and insights as in the previous process to figure out ways to better understand them. So we will examine 3 key ingredients that will help us to create the right customized recipe to work with our sites and site supervisors. The 3 ingredients we will review are: understand the workplace culture of each site, understand the work style of each site supervisor, and understand the communication style and communication expectations of each site supervisor. So let's begin with the first ingredient. So our first ingredient is to understand the work culture of each site. Let's spend a couple of minutes reminding ourselves what organizational or workplace culture is. This definition that you see on the screen by Daniel Dennison describes workplace culture as underlying values, beliefs, and principles that serve as a foundation for the organization's management system, as well as the set of management practices and behaviors that both exemplify and reinforce these principles. So this captures the key aspects that govern a workplace culture. Now let's look at few main cultural dimensions associated with workplace culture. While there are several workplace culture dimensions, we will quickly look at three common dimensions that most of the cross-culture authors tend to emphasize. Concept of power. This dimension identifies how employees in an organization relate to each other and how much power different employees have in initiating and making decisions. So at one end of the spectrum, workplace cultures tend to demonstrate more of a hierarchical structure where the manager is expected to take control and make decisions. At the other end, employees are given more autonomy and encouraged to make decisions and take initiative. Next is the attitude towards uncertainty. This dimension describes how an organization might view risk taken by employees. Some workplace cultures have the tendency to be very cautious and control risk taken by employees. They have more regulations, policies, and procedures and require employees to strictly adhere to structure, rules, and systems to avoid the unknown. At the other hand, or the other end, are work cultures that encourage risk-taking by employees. These organizations have fewer regulations and procedures and tend to embrace the unknown with curiosity and as opportunities for creativity and advancement. The third dimension is task versus relationship. I'm sure most of you have experienced this. So task-oriented workplace cultures focuses primarily on the task at hand and accomplishing the results. They might see focusing on tasks and getting results first will ultimately bring people together and create harmony. Workplace cultures that give more importance to relationship building and trust building among their employees tend to be relationship-oriented workplace cultures. They tend to believe that good outcomes will only be achieved if there are strong working relationships and high level of trust among employees. This dimension could be experienced in a simple workplace function like conducting meetings. Some workplaces will ensure that they set aside adequate time at the beginning of a meeting to do a good check-in, as they highly value and give a lot of importance to the relationship aspect. Other workplaces might have a tendency to get to business right away, and then might be and that could be an indication of their task orientation nature. So it is important to remember that most of the time, a workplace culture will not fall into one of the extreme ends of a certain cultural dimension. Each dimension is represented along a continuum, as you can see, and what you will find is that a workplace culture will operate somewhere along that continuum based on the value that organization carries regarding that cultural dimension. So it's very important to keep that in mind. Now, let's quickly look at how these different workplace cultural dimensions are represented in an organization. What you might notice is the workplace practices and procedures might make cultural dimensions more obvious as they describe tangible aspects of the organization. Differences in practices and procedures at different sites will again require a customized approach. At a practical level, work culture differences could affect things like how we adapt our site visits based on site's protocols, procedures, dress code, accepted greetings, meeting formats, etc. Okay, so that's a quick view of what workplace culture consists of. I know it's a quick review, so if you are not very familiar about this subject matter, we kindly invite you to visit the Google University and do a search on this, and you will get a lot of great information and become familiar. So you understand what these different dimensions and how they sort of come to play at the workplace. Now let's get back to our ideas and insight sharing conversation. So now our question is, what are some ways that have helped you or you plan to use to understand the workplace culture of each site?
All right, and by now you know the drill, but just a quick reminder, please use the drop-down to select all panelists and attendees. And again, the question, what are some ways to understand the workplace culture of each of your sites? Let's see, Amy says you could develop a self-assessment for supervisors and vistas. Let's see, Quinta says, given the limitations imposed by COVID, researching websites, staff list, board members, etc., since I guess you can't go visit each of the sites, you could do some online research. Megan said, yeah, before COVID, you could do site visits and learn about it firsthand. Mariah suggests attending a staff meeting at the site to get a sense of their work culture practices and the general vibe. Rosemary says they have a Slack channel, so I guess they can all communicate and get to know each other through that forum. Let's see, someone here says trial and error with conversations, so learning as you go. Yeah, again, the virtual site visits, doing regular check-ins with the vistas and the supervisors. And Rhiannon also says using a questionnaire to get to some of these things. All right, great suggestions there.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, leaders, for giving us a good start to our customizing our approach conversation with your insightful, generous sharing. And also, as some of you pointed out, your Vista members who are at the work site or each site, they are definitely a great resource because they breathe in and breathe out the site's culture every day, right? So thank you. Thank you for all these great ideas. So our next ingredient is about how to understand the work style of each site supervisor. First, what do we mean by styles? When we say a style, whether it is a work style, thinking style, communication style, etc., we are referring to a way of engagement that is based on an individual's preference, habit, and level of comfort. So when dealing with styles, it is very important for us to keep in mind that there is no right or wrong style. We all can adopt most styles. We also prefer to use one style over the others, and we can change our styles at will. There are many ways you can categorize work styles. Let's look at few common work styles. So again, when you are looking at different models and assessment tools to identify different work styles, there are many out there. So here's one framework that comes from an article from Fast Company. First style seems to refer to individuals who like to have a logical and scientific type approach to work, as you can see from the screen. Second are the detailed oriented planners. Third style has a more people-oriented emphasis. And fourth style tend to be more creative and vision-oriented type. So what matters is not necessarily which work style inventory is better or what inventory one should use. What really matters is about finding out what tend to be the core work values, habits, and tendencies of the individual you are working with. If an individual has taken a formal work style inventory, it is always helpful to find out what the assessment results are. So let me quickly show you a few major work style and personality styles assessment tools commonly used today. So you can familiarize yourselves with those in case if one of your site supervisors or site partners have taken them and share their results with you. One is called the DISC inventory. It focuses on the first, 4 work styles of dominance, influence, steadiness, and consciousness. Another famous one is called Myers-Briggs Personality Types Indicator, which stands MBTI. Some of you may have taken this inventory, which is based on 8 style focuses, including extraversion, introversion, among others, which results in 16 different styles. A third one is called the strength-based leadership, which identifies your top 5 strengths out of 33 strength categories and shows how they fall within 4 main leadership traits. If you have not taken this, I would strongly recommend taking it. As we mentioned before, there are many types of assessments out there. You will find some free ones online. So now it's time for once again for our idea and insight sharing. What are some of the techniques or tools that have helped you or you plan to use to understand the work style of each site supervisor? Please share your thoughts using the chat function.
All right, so just looking to hear some of the ways that you can understand the work style of your site supervisors. Tim says having one-on-one meetings and open conversation about work styles. Quinta shared observation and talking to the VISTA members who are assigned to that site. Let's see, one of our participants from Service Housing Action says you can learn about it through their email communications. Yep, and Sean seconds that about looking at the style in their emails. What do their responses look like? Are they short or long, detailed, quickly, slowly, slow response time? Mariah says that they've used the True Colors personality type assessment, and they've had both the site supervisors and the VISTA members take it and then discuss it afterwards. And Rhiannon says take the direct approach, just ask them. Yeah, so it seems like there's several different approaches here. A very direct one through one-on-one conversation. Another is more observational, reading between the lines, looking at their emails. And then another is doing something more formal, like using an assessment tool and then having a discussion around that. So nice answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. These are great, yes, very, very helpful and applicable insights. And as you also mentioned, the observation element is also something I would like to highlight too, because it gives us a day-to-day opportunity when we are very keen on our observations on how our site supervisor or even our own supervisor responds. There's a lot we can learn from that. If the response is more sort of reflective, more positive, then we can ask ourselves, okay, what did I do to create such response from my site supervisor? So that will give you some ideas about that person's individual's work style and what that person sort of appreciates and get encouraged by. Then if we find at a certain time a certain site supervisor has reacted to our communication, that is also a great opportunity to look beyond our emotional feelings about it and really asking, now, what could have led that person to react this way? That will also give you a sort of an inside look to that person's work style and also the personality style. So thank you, great idea. Okay, now let's examine the last ingredient that we can use to customize our working approach. As we saw with work styles, there are also many models and assessment tools to identify different communication styles. So here's a common communication model that focuses on 4 styles: passive, passive-aggressive, and assertive. So the passive style communicator tends to put others' needs before the person's needs, avoid direct eye contact, and carry feelings of inferiority. Also might become apologetic in context, in communication context. Aggressive communicator feels superior, put the person's need about the others, and this is the second one, and tend to be inappropriately direct and loud, tends to blame and attack in the conversational context. Third one, passive-aggressive style communicator tends not to focus on either the person's own needs or the other person's needs. This type of communicator also likes to complain. Then the fourth style is being an assertive communicator who tends to operate with high self-esteem and speaks firmly with confidence. The individual carries self-respect and demonstrates respect for others. This style also operates on the belief that equality is the key to effective and respectful communication. Let me share one other important nugget about communication styles. This is the intercultural communication dimension called degree of directness. Certain cultures tend to communicate more indirectly, while other cultures use a direct communication style. In direct communication, individuals tend to say what they mean, the words carry the meaning, so there is no need to read between lines. The importance of truth takes precedence over not hurting someone's feelings. With indirect communication, words do not carry the entire meaning of the message, and therefore one has to read between the lines. Since hurting someone's feelings is avoided in this communication style, one might even temper the truth. The reason I want to bring this to your kind attention is that many communication models, mostly developed by direct communication cultures, tend to highlight direct communication as better. Therefore, when we hear such messages, we need to pay attention to our understanding of indirect communication from an intercultural communication perspective, so we do not underestimate what that indirect style brings to the table. Let's quickly revisit what we have discussed during our webinar. First, we identified and described the complexities and challenges as we as leaders face working with our site supervisors. Then we reviewed a 4-step process to working effectively with site supervisors and site partners. Finally, we examined 3 key ingredients that will help us to create customized approach to working with our site supervisors and site partners, where you all very generously shared some great tools, techniques, and ideas that we can use.
Great. And before we get to any questions you might have, we'd like to share 2 resources that are relevant to this topic. The first is the Vista Leader's Guide to Elevating Relationships with Site Supervisors. It provides communication, relationship building, and leadership resources to help leaders elevate relationships with site supervisors. The nice thing is it includes a companion piece for site supervisors on how they can elevate relationships with their Vista leaders. The other one is called Managing Up. It's a guide for Vistas and leaders on how to effectively manage up to bring out the best value to their supervisors, their organizations, and the projects. So we encourage you to explore these and other resources on the Vista campus under the Action Learning Team products. And these are resources that were created by Vista leader teams, and therefore we think they're really meaningful and practical for you. And you can see the link there in the chat. And to give you an opportunity to share with other leaders and to benefit from their experiences, I created a thread, a discussion thread on the Vista campus in the Vista Leader Open Space Forum. And it's there to gather your ideas on how to establish effective relationships with site supervisors. So are there things that you do to build your relationship with a supervisor at each site? Are there tools you use for effective communication? Have you discovered approaches that you think really work? If so, then I kindly invite you to share them here on the discussion forum. The link will be in the chat in just a moment. We're using the discussion forum there because we have limited time in the webinar, and this way you can go to it, and even after the webinar you can keep adding and others will be able to benefit from that. And since we're all together, I'm wondering if I could get a couple volunteers for this. So if you're willing to commit to posting something in the forum, say in the next week or so, please add a note in the chat. If you want, you can send it just to the panelists and I'll see your name, and then I can follow up and make sure you have what you need.
Thank you, Andy. So yes, please. Oh, great. So we see some of our colleagues are volunteering. And Andy, if you can, once we have about 3-4 volunteers, if you could read their names, that would be great, Andy.
Sure. Well, we have one so far, Rhiannon. Thank you so much for volunteering. Ryan as well, thank you. Yeah, I love the exclamation mark. I see your enthusiasm, which is tremendous. And you can see Steve has posted the link to the forum there, so all of you can join. Okay, well, we've got 2 so far. I'm going to, hope to get a couple more before we wrap up. So, thanks to the 2 of you so far, and others of you I hope will also be inspired to join the conversation there. But let's move on. Go ahead, Kapila.
So if I may quickly, great. Mm-hmm. So we have 3. That's a great number to start. So Rhiannon, Ryan, and Tim. So thank you so very much for willing to take lead in this conversation, because as you all know, the most important things happen after a webinar. That is where the opportunity. It's not the webinar. Webinar, we are just sort of trying to launch something, but the real mission is in your hand. And what we are kindly inviting 3 of you who have very generously volunteered. If 3 of you can make a point, as Andy pointed out, before next Friday, if you can get something posted on the campus under this thread. This will also get others joining. And here's my kind invitation to you. Make this post-webinar chat on this topic, because this is a very important topic. It's an ongoing conversation. One of the best living chat conversations on the Vista campus. And so that's our invitation. Thank you, Andy. And thank you, leaders.
Yeah, thank you, Kapila. You make such a great case. All right, so we are at the Q&A portion. And I realize we're almost at the top of the hour. So if you need to go, we understand that. But if you have questions, Kapila and I are willing to sort of stay after class and take care of those. And if you want to stay and listen, you're more than welcome to do that. Again, we'll use the chat for the questions. But because I know some of you have to leave, I want to just jump ahead to the next slide and do a little plug for our next webinar, which is called 5 Ways Vista Leaders Support Members and Projects. A colleague of mine, Eric Powell, and I will be leading that webinar. It's on Thursday, November 12th, same time. You'll get an email invitation for that. Hope to see you there as well. All right, so let's go to our questions. And I see we have one already. So in this question, the person who wrote it said, I'm on the autism spectrum, and I don't always get subtlety. I also don't like indirect styles so much. I'd rather people just tell me straight up, which means I have to let them know how I understand the world. So I'm not sure if that's a question, but sort of a comment, and it ties into the intercultural communication, Kapila, that you were talking about. So just wonder if you have any thoughts, reflection about that.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Rosemary. This is thank you so much for that thought, the statement, or the what you just shared, because you really giving us a very important reminder here, and that is when I'm looking at the last piece where you said, which means I have to let them know how I understand the world. That is so great, because that's what leaders do, right? So when we initiate and when we reach out to people and we express, help them to be able to communicate effectively with us, we have been a role model to them. So then they will also, in turn, will be encouraged to share their needs of communication. So I really salute you for, bringing that thought. And as I said, so it's more than a question, it's a great insight for all of us. So thank you, Rosemary.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Kapila. And I don't see any other questions here. So it's possible that we haven't raised any particular questions, but I'll do one more call out. So if you have questions for Kapila about the content, here's your chance. We're using the chat for that. And you've got about 10 more seconds to put your question in, or if you like, you could raise your hand and we could open your phone line. All right, well, seeing no questions and seeing that we're just a couple minutes past the top of the hour, let's go ahead and wrap up. So I want to take this moment to thank our presenter, Kapila Vivegama, for all of your insights and sharing so much tremendous information. I also want to thank our production team, Mike Dietz and Steve Gray from LSI. And I want to thank you, all of you, for participating and sharing your ideas with your fellow leaders. We hope you gained some additional ideas or techniques to help you navigate working with your site supervisors. All right, so that wraps it up. We hope to see you again very soon.